We're taught in life that to finish last is a bad thing. Maybe you finish last in a foot race or in a spelling bee or, you know, on a sports team of some sort. Or you've heard the old adage that nice guys finish last. But finishing last isn't always a bad thing. If you're a biblical person, the Gospel of Matthew says that the first will be last and the last will be first. And in this case, it's good to be last, especially if you're a caboose, the last caboose built for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. Hi, this is Trevor from History on the Move, and I have 904093 behind me today, and we are going to get you all over this thing, inside, outside, and really get you a good look at it. This is one of my favorite pieces of the collection, and as I mentioned, this is the last caboose on record built for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. So grab your favorite cup of coffee, tea, whatever it is that you drink, sit back, relax. I think you're going to really enjoy this one. So as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, this is the last caboose built for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. And this is significant in multiple ways. The biggest one here, though, is this caboose marks the end of an era, the end of that time frame in which we see these, the end of the train with the happy conductor and the brakeman going by, and you get a friendly wave if you're trackside. And the end of an era in which there are crew members, there are humans in the back of the train watching out for anything from the rear all the way to the head end. Eventually, the caboose would be replaced by things like the flashing rear end device, which would then give way to the end of train device, the EOT, which has since been modernized and uses telemetry to tell things like brake pressure and other things to the head end. And so the conductor and brakeman are long gone. They don't exist anymore. So this guy behind me, 904093, marks that. This is the line of disembarkation, if you will. Let's talk more about that. So the year is 1978, and the chassis system, in this case the B&O Railroad and the C&O, put an order in to the Fruit Growers Express. Yes, those Fruit Growers Express, the people that built the refrigerated cars that we all know, and most of us probably have on our model railroads at home. They were also in the, not only did they build their own cars, but they also helped build them for railroads by contracting that out. So in this case, they, B&O and the C&O, put an order in for 160 cabooses of the most modern iteration. They want the latest and greatest in this capacity. And so the first of those, the first 66, are going to go to the C&O, and the remaining 94 are going to go to the B&O. And this guy behind me, 904093, is the last one built in that iteration, that order that came from chassis to the Fruit Growers Express. And that is absolutely a hallmark moment. That is a touch point for the railroads to say these things are at the end of their lives. But they decided to order more. And eventually, this is another video for another time, but cabooses would give way to the end of train device. And a lot of them were either scrapped, put into museums, or were kept around as shoving platforms. And so that's the significance of the caboose here. And what I find to be most fascinating is this thing has some really amazing technology for the year it was built, 1980. And so that order came through. Like I said, let me go back to the history of this thing. So the order came through and they said, look, this is 1978. We want to put this order in, but we don't want them delivered until 1980. And so from July until October of 1980, there is just construction of these things going on in Alexandria, Virginia, at the Fruit Growers Express factory. And what is absolutely amazing about that is they were really cranking these guys out, and they got it down to a process. You know, they really know they had built enough cars over their lifetime to where they knew what they were doing. And so this 904093 rolls out, and this is it. It's the end of an era. And that is absolutely just a phenomenal moment. But let's get up close and personal with 904093 and really understand what it is to look at a modern day Caboose.
Bet your life on it, my friend. Dancing around the town to these sidewalk sounds, just moving through the local saloon.
All right, so let's start out here on the ground, and we'll do a ground tour and then work our way inside. So we're looking at a truck here, and other than the fact that it's a Arbor Bettendorf, as you can see, that's cast into it, 904093 has roller bearings on all 4 axles, and that's part and parcel for this time frame. Plain bearings are long gone at this point, and so that is what we're dealing with. Now, this is neat. I want to point this out. So on this particular axle, you have a pulley, 2 grooves here, and that drives another pulley here, and then that bolts to this pulley, which then through this belt drives an alternator right here. And the alternator converts AC, or generates AC electricity, and through a rectifier and some diodes, it turns it into DC electricity, and then through these wires, you see here, and then, yeah, everything, if you follow this wire bundle, it goes up, and it goes here, and then we'll see when we go inside, but this feeds into the electrical panel that's inside, and we'll see that. But this also charges the battery, hence why you need to be able to convert AC into DC. What I also think is kind of neat, and they were thinking about everything for Growers Express when they did this, was this has a suspension system in it. How cool is this? So as this compresses, because that's what's going to happen, you're going to hit some rough patches in the track. I'll hold this still so you can see. See? You can see that down the bottom. That is supposed to do that through these 2 coil springs right here. You actually can see there's one inside of the other. So pretty neat, pretty neat. And that also would help to provide tension as well on these pulleys for the belt. All right, let's keep moving here. So 904093 also came with an AB brake valve from Growers Express. Yeah, I don't believe it was ever upgraded at any point in its life, but this is an AB valve. The newer ones, the second iteration would have been ABD, and then ABDW and ABDX and whatever else. But yeah, this AB is essentially the modern freight brake as we know it. We'll keep moving here. Here's her reservoir. That's the air reservoir, and then you have the cylinder right here. So this is what actually pushes on the shoes, and then those push against the wheel. And this is pretty important to point out, this is the battery charging receptacle. So why is this important? Well, these were parked a lot of times in Caboose yards or on Caboose tracks, and those Caboose tracks had long heavy cables going out there, and that way you could charge the batteries like this. And so again, this would have been AC going in, because that's an AC plug, and then it would have converted through, again, rectifiers and diodes. On the other side, there's a box, and we'll see it when we get over there, to DC to then help charge that battery. So pretty common. You see this on most of the quote-unquote modern Cabooses, you know, 60s, 70s, 80s. So that is pretty neat to point out, and that is a 50 amp right there. So that is a 50 amp. I believe that's 220 if I'm not mistaken. It might be something else, but that is a educated guess. All right, let's keep moving here. So nothing really special here, just another Arbor Bettendorf. Truck, again, roller bearings on both axles. And now we get to some neat stuff to talk about. And so, as we've stated in other Caboose videos, cabooses are obviously at the end of a train. And sometimes, in this case, the B&O had to get over some pretty tough grades, Allegheny, sand patch, etc., etc. So you would need a locomotive sometimes to help you, a helper locomotive, to come up behind, couple on, and then help shove you up and over whatever grade you're trying to get over. But having to stop, as the caboose crew, having to stop the whole train, get down, pull the cut lever, close the angle cock, giant pain, and also a waste of time. That eats up a lot of time. So if you can do it on the fly, even better. And so that's what we're looking at here. All right, let's start off with, let's pretend. So we have blue flag protection here. So let's pretend we have a helper locomotive that's coupled on here. And you don't want to get on the ground and pull this thing. So Fruit Growers Express came up with this. You have a welded piece. Let's see if I can get you a better angle. There we go. You got a welded piece here, the notch, and that comes out, and then there's a chain attached. If we follow that chain up, that comes up to here. Now, this would have been a little bit more stout than this piece of tie wire. This is definitely a temporary job. But for all intents and purposes, in order to open the knuckle, in order to allow the helper locomotive to back away, you would simply, and we can do this because one, we have blue flag, two, there is nothing attached to this. But you can, if you're up here, you pull, and that would pull up on the cut lever. All right, so, but like I said, you also need to be able to shut off the air. You cannot have air going through here, because otherwise, if you do, if the angle cock is left in the open position, which is this, right, so air is flowing, and you go to cut off the helper, what will happen is you will send your entire train into emergency. In other words, you're stopping. So what they did was, Fruit Growers Express, and I'm sure there were other companies before that did this, came up with this genius mechanism here. So it's a piece of plate cut that fits over the angle cock, and that's your angle cock right here, this piece. The plate sits over it, and you have a universal joint, right? If you got a socket set at home, you've probably seen one of these before. Nice wobbly bit, and then you have this piece that's welded. That goes up to a T-handle right here. And so what you would do, if you watch the T-handle, so when the T-handle is horizontal to the handrails, this is open and flowing. The angle cock is in the open position. But if we go to and watch it turn, and now it is not. So it is perpendicular to it. And so now if you come down, we scan here, now your angle cock is closed. So let's keep moving here. So those are the two methods, and that way the crew could be up here, be safe, out of the way. They didn't have to come down onto the ground and then stop the train. It's a whole big hullabaloo. You also have a dump valve here, so in case you need to just dump your air, you can just do it right here. All right, let's keep moving here. So this is something neat to point out. This is on all of the windows, is that they would have had screens up here, and we'll see those when we go inside. Each one of these windows had screens on them. And if you look here on the bay window portion, you can see these channels. You see, well, what used to be channels. These had guides that went there, and there were these sliding windows, and we'll see them inside. And they would go like this, and they were at that angle for, main reason is to keep them from flying open, right? And the reason for the screen mesh was to keep dirt, rocks, and other debris as you're going along from coming up and smashing your windows. That's the main thing here. And state-of-the-art windshield wipers. And over on what would be the museum's north side, you also have another battery charging receptacle here. And here's your proof that it was built by Fruit Growers Express in Alexandria, Virginia. Here is this is what you have air in your brake valve, you would pull on this, and that is what dumps all the air inside of the brake valve itself. Let's keep moving here. And this is where Dwight Jones gets all the credit. Him and Jerry Doyle came out here and, well, not out here, but out to Peach Creek, West Virginia. We'll get into that story inside. But this is where they came out and they stenciled this. So that way, chassis system / CSX would not scrap this. And this is phenomenal. Do not dismantle or release from service. Hold for shipment to B&O Museum via Locust Point, Baltimore. Before movement, contact museum at blah, 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 blah. And this is neat. Kudos to Dwight for putting this on here. Per letter of December 22nd, 1992. And right in here it says CSXT Jacksonville. So pretty neat that he was able to save this, right? So something else we want to point out is the B&O on paper as a corporation ceased to exist in 1987. So remember, this is built in 1980. So let's just keep that in mind. Let's see. There's not really much else. Although I do want to point out, I am fascinated by, I was reading about this. They really, actually, let's go back to the other side because we can show that better. Also, this is your battery box here. All right, so on this side, you really get a good idea of, if you were to compare this caboose to other cabooses at the time, previously, right? Turn of the century and into the 30s, 40s, you can really see how these handrails are perfectly laid out. And, you know, we'll show you when we get up there. But these are set out at such a height, and they're purposely designed, as are the grab irons here. So all these are in perfect, alignment. They were made to be able to, they were thinking of the crew. What is best for the crew? And this is kind of neat too. These marker lights. Yes, those are marker lights right there. Let me zoom in for that. And you can see a little plastic flap here down the bottom. And that flap actually drops down and allows the light to then hit these stairs below. So that way if you're getting down, you had light to illuminate the stairs. So pretty neat and pretty impressive that, instead of having to hang marker lamps, they just incorporated it right into there, into the body itself. And of course you have your flashing red light here, indicating the end of the train, and a porch light, as they would call it. There's your porch light up there. So that is pretty neat. I find that absolutely fascinating. That they really thought of every detail in 78 when the order was put in. But they thought of all the details before they constructed this caboose.
We just don't know what every single second, you never get it up. Bet your life on it, my friend.
All right, so now that we're inside, now something I want to point out is cabooses have brake wheels on both sides. And you say, well, how in the world do you differentiate A and B? Well, in this case, you quite simply stencil it on there. This is the B end. Obviously, the other side is the A end. Let's see. Let's start over here on the B end. You got a fusee and torpedo rack here. Place to hang your hat or helmet or whatever it is, hard hat. And then you have a fuel tank. And this we'll get into in a minute. But there's your fuel tank. This is the fill for said tank, and that's on the outside of the car. And there's your light switches. So what do we got? So we got ceiling, platform, heater fan, marker, and set switch at toilet wall. All right, so that's got something to do with the bathroom. So right next to said fuel tank, fuel oil tank, is the commode. This is where it gets pretty neat. So this is, I would say, there's a lot of privacy. Obviously, this is to, we'll say, vent said fumes from out of this place. But yeah, this is your restroom. remember I talked about those screens? Well, here they are. You can see, let's get down closer. You can see the angle. Hopefully that shows up. But these are at an angle. These are the ones that are canted, and they go up and down on those bay windows. And then the other ones that are not canted, these rectangular ones, are the ones that would be on windows like this or the other ones. So, and then this, so this is your main water coming in, and we'll trace that back out on the other side. This is water coming into the toilet, and it tees off right here, and it feeds the sink. So again, this is water from the reservoir coming down, feeds into the sink, and then continues and feeds into the toilet. Behind the screen, here's the, I don't know if you can see, there's the seat, and there's your porcelain appliance itself. And yes, they did have a fan. Well, a vent. And they had a light. And a place to hang your, well, anything you like. All right, let's keep moving here. All right, so this is pretty, I would say, well, not say state of the art, but this is pretty up to date for 1980s. So they got a nice sink here. And of course, you only have cold water. There's no heater for that. And remember I talked about the water coming in. Well, here's the water. Here's that pipe coming in here. There's your valve to close it or open it. And above us, this canted, tilted reservoir is where this is your water. This is your main water reservoir right here. And you got your waste paper towel receptacle there, and you can put your orders or what have you here. This guy. And this toilet, I want to point this out. This toilet that's here is what they call a retention toilet. So when you flush, it goes into this container, and this container basically sits there and it puts some chemicals in there to dilute it and make it not smell so poof. And when you get to either the terminal or the caboose yard, you would then pump this out. This would then get eradicated by that. You would pump it out, and no more smelly things. Now the sink would this just goes straight onto the if we go back down below, but this goes straight onto the gravel / ties that are below. So that's it, just gravity, obviously, just like your house. Just flows and then straight out there. Now here is how I'm sure the crews of 1930s and 40s would love to have one of these. This is an oil burning unit here, stove to keep this. So it serves two purposes. One, keep yourself warm, right, in December, January, February, March. But two, if you're a railroader, you need your coffee, and you've got to have it. So one, you can stay awake, and two, you got some energy in you. So this is that. This is a cooktop for that. And you also obviously heat like your soup, your spaghetti, whatever it is that you're eating. Cook eggs, what have you. We take this off. We look inside. That's the inside of it there. There's the very tip of the burner unit. Follow my finger down. That's that. And so pretty neat. And it radiates that heat out. I can only imagine it does a pretty stinking good job. And then it vents to atmosphere here, and then on top of the roof you would be able to see that smoke jack that comes up and then allows it to go out. And we come down here. So here's the fuel line that comes around, comes through here, and then over here, here's your burner unit right here. So this is your burner unit. Allows you to adjust flow as such. All right. Now, something else I want to point out is, you may have seen this as we walked in, is look at all these seats. You may say, Trevor, what in tarnation are all these seats here for? Well, simply said, this was used a lot of times for deadheading crews. Deadheading meaning they are not in service, they are just there for the ride. So you had 4 seats, 1, 2, 3, 4 over here. And you had the conductor's desk over here, so you have 2 seats there. And then you have another seat here. This actually has a brake valve, so that way whoever's sitting here, conductor, brakeman, etc., could adjust the air pressure and or dump the air if need be, if they're watching the train. And then over here, whoever's sitting here has control of the radio. So your big radio box would have sat here. This is where your headset would have gone. And this is what would have gone into said radio, as well as this guy here. So that's pretty neat. What is also neat is these seats actually flip over. Now, I'm going to pick a seat here, probably this one. Let's go with this one. So these safety locks are just that. All right, so here it's in the locked position. What you do is you pull up like so, and said seat flips over like so. So that's how that works. Once it comes back, push it down, and there's a little locking mechanism in here that then comes down and allows you to lock said seat in place. So that is pretty neat. Plenty of seating, plenty of seating. And also I'll point out that, man, there is plenty of grab irons in here, handholds, right? Slack action, even slack action knows no time frame. Doesn't matter if you're railroading in, the 1890s or the 1980s, slack action was still a real thing. You still had to hold on because it's hard to anticipate when it's going to run in, run out. So you had grab irons here. Up top, you have one that runs the whole length, and one here. And again, they're spattered throughout. This is also cool. They have clothes hangers, and they're one piece. They're one-piece clothes hangers that just sit right over here. So you need to hang up your jacket. That's where you do it. And of course, whoever's sitting here has an eye on the brake gauge. There's the brake gauge, so you know what your air pressure is. And as this indicates, we should fasten our shoulder harness. And, well, why is that? Well, slack action again. And now, unfortunately, the harnesses have been taken out, but this is very much like, if not the same, as what's in your automobile, in your car. So this would come through. Here's the receptacle for it here. And so that way you could be snug as a bug in a rug. And here is the bunk setup. So you had one here. This was obviously always horizontal. And then this guy here has this latching mechanism, which I'm not going to mess with because it's frozen in place. But you would lift this up and out, and this whole thing would then do one of these and come up, and then you have it would sit on top of here. So you push this out of the way like so, get it up to this height, and then as it sits at the height, it would lock into here. And that's how you would do that. And of course, grab iron. And we'll turn back around here. So now we're facing south on the car. And like all good cabooses, you have to have a conductor's desk. And here you have your light here. You also have a pretty good view out the window. You have a nice desk, which this is neat too. They put padding in here. Check that out. I mean, like I said, they really thought of everything. 1980, they really thought of everything. And does that actually, I believe that's on a hinge. We're not going to mess with that though. But again, you have two seats, same principle with those safety locks. There. And remember how I showed you the alternator and the wires that were coming up? Well, this is what it feeds here. This is the main breaker panel here. So much like in your house, everything is here, and then this feeds out to whatever it is that you need. Because at this current moment, there's only a main breaker in place. And as any caboose junkie knows, storage is at a premium in this place. You must have storage. And so this acted as storage, although you can hang up your coats here if you wanted to or what have you, but this is also your electrical cabinet here. This is your electrical cabinet. So you can see that here. And let's see, is there anything else? Not really. So this is essentially your electrical cabinet. And the one next to it, over here, this is just a cabinet. So you could store whatever you like in here. Your clothes, your, kit bag, whatever it is, your kit would go in here. And as I pointed out when we first walked in, you got a B end, you have an A end. Here's your A end. And over here you also have a torpedoes and fusees. And what I also think is neat is there is a lot of storage in this thing, like I said. And there are plenty of racks to put tools in. This would be to put all of your accoutrements for your tools. And you also have this cabinet right here. And made of plywood. So if we lift this up, let's see. So we got ourselves, put my knee in here. Okay, so we got ourselves need an extender for your air hose. You also have three spare knuckles. You have a spare belt for your alternator and drive pulley setup down there. And you have the wrench as well. And so that's a pretty good sized storage bin. Now, you're able to heat up things, right, for your lunch and your dinner and your eggs for breakfast, but you got to be able to cool stuff off. And how do you do that? Well, in this case, you got a big old ice box right here. And this is not just any old ice box. This is kind of state of the art for back then. So your ice would go in up here. I'm not going to pull this up though, because this is kind of frozen in place and this thing is tacky and nasty. But you would load your ice in up here. And this is your, I can only imagine inside of here is galvanized stainless steel and some insulating material in order to keep said cold in. And then you have down here your, essentially, ice box, or not your ice box, but your refrigerator portion of this. How about them apples? That is pretty neat. I say these guys were living the lap of luxury for 1980. And you also have a drain valve down below, because if you have ice, guess what happens? It melts eventually. And so you have a drain valve right down the bottom. Well, believe me, the stencil says so. It's there. And that would just drain onto the track, so that way once your ice melts, it turns into water, you can just dump the condensate down onto the tracks. Now, since we're already at the ground level, let's also talk about what we're looking at here for flooring. This is red oak. Yep, this is literal hardwood flooring in this caboose. I am astounded. Like, you could really live in this thing. If you really wanted to, you could essentially live in this thing. You also had your lights. So you have multiple, you have three lights in this thing. Here's one, there's two, there's another one down there, three. And you also had vents, right? So if you get smoke in here or, you know, what have you, it's a hot summer day, right? There's no air conditioning, you can vent. And you have another one down, yeah, another vent outside. So pretty stinking neat. So as we said at the outset of this video, 904093 was built by the Fruit Growers Express Works in Alexandria, Virginia in October of 1980. And it was one of 94 of the C27A classes of bay window steel cabooses that were to come out of that particular works. And so what I find fascinating though is that actually 904093 has a very short service career. So it comes out October of 1980, goes into service almost directly afterwards. And it was sometime in the early 90s that Dwight Jones, Mr. Caboose himself, knew of the location of 904093, had taken up residence, if you will, in the Peach Creek Yards, which is an old C&O yard in the foothills of West Virginia. The coal fields, it was, you know, mixed into there. And so he goes out there on November 26, 1993, with his buddy Jerry Doyle, with stencils in hand, and that, what we showed you on the outside, that logo, last caboose built for the B&O, with the Capitol Dome emblem, was stenciled on that day, as well as the lettering to say, look, don't scrap this thing. We want to put it into a museum and preserve it so others can know of the significance of this particular caboose. And it was sometime after that, I'm not exactly sure, if I had to surmise, maybe the early part of 1994, that 904093 unfortunately got into a mishap, whether it was in the yard or over the road, not sure. But the A end stairs to get up here and the handrails were mangled. So they sent it off to the Russell yards in order to be, and that's in Kentucky, in order to be fixed up. Now, the weird part is the only part that was actually fixed were the stairs. Right? I guess because you got to be able to get up and down. But the handrails were never actually fixed. And fast forward to 1996, in June of that year, it was moved into the B&O Railroad Museum itself. And that was under the guise of Dennis Fulton. Dennis Fulton knew how significant 904093 was and what a great story it told. Like we said, this gave way to the end of train device and what we know now as cabooseless trains. So if you've watched this channel for any length of time, or perhaps you're new here, as a former history major, I absolutely love to be able to give you the gift of knowledge, because this is how I do the episodes. Read these and it all comes together. And so I was taught by one of my favorite history professors, Dr. Robert Rook, to cite your sources, Trevor. He used to say that all the time. So that obviously stuck with me. Let's talk about what sources I used for this particular episode. One that I used for I'd say the culmination of all the Caboose videos, whether it's previous or forthcoming, is going to be Cabooses of the Baltimore, Ohio Railroad by Robert Hubler? Hubler? I don't know how you say it, but phenomenal book, great writer, and he is very direct, short, and concise. I like that. Encyclopedia of B&O Cabooses, this is volume 1, The Modern Cars, by Dwight Jones. And what you should know is Dwight Jones is pretty much Mr. Caboose, we'll call him. Anything you want to know, any kind of research, the love affair with cabooses is strong with Dwight, and I appreciate that. The man knows his stuff. And so this book was really great. This really got into the weeds on the C27A and the other modern cabooses. The other one that I use on a fairly regular basis is this one here. This is B&O Railroad Museum Cabooses, also by Dwight Jones, and I find this one to be very helpful. Keep in mind that the copyright on this is somewhere in the early 2000s, and so some of the cabooses that were here when he wrote have left, and new ones have come in, etc., etc. So it's not exactly up to date, but it is still a phenomenal book, and he's got a really good history on this one, 904093, in this particular book. And if you really want to read a short, concise understanding of the caboose and a really good understanding as to why they eventually, went away and how the demise came in and what replaced them, really recommend this one. This is a great one. You could probably read this in an afternoon or an evening. Caboose by Michael Schaefer. He really goes into depth about the end of train devices and what it is that they were able to provide for the railroads. And so that is the gift of knowledge that I give to you.
Get your foot in the door, answers come in all shapes and sizes.
Wow, I gotta say, we really got a good look at 904093. And now, hopefully you understand more as to why it is so significant in the annals of railroad history. This is literally the last caboose built for the B&O. And more importantly, it allows us to understand the push towards bigger and better technology, such as the end of train device. Whether or not EOT is the end-all be-all, who knows? But I'm glad I got to take you along and see what a modern caboose would look like. Because as of, its build date of October 1980, this was state-of-the-art. This was state-of-the-art. And I can tell you this, the caboose crews, the conductors, brakemen, flagmen of the century prior, boy, they would be jealous if they were riding in 904093. Those old wooden crummies, cabooses, whatever you want to call them, boy, those crews would have been very jealous. So this is Trevor from History on the Move. I sure hope you enjoyed watching this. And stay tuned, we got some really good episodes coming your way. And remember, get out there, read history, explore history, and more importantly, make your own history. I'll see you on the next one.